Hi, welcome to 15 Minutes to Merge. My name is Christopher Harrison. I'm a senior developer advocate at GitHub, and lately I've been getting a fair number of questions about GitHub Copilot for Business. Fortunately, I have an expert with me today to answer those questions. That is Allison Weins, who is a senior PM on the GitHub Copilot team. Welcome. Thank you for
Thanks
joining.
so much for having me, Christopher. Always happy to be here and talk about all the amazing things that GitHub Copilot is doing and hopefully help all of you learn how to use it just a little bit better and merge just a little bit quicker.
Excellent. I appreciate that. And I think that's like a perfect intro into one of the biggest questions that I get asked, which is what are some of the most common scenarios, workloads that I can sort of offload, if you will, into GitHub Copilot or sort of rely on GitHub Copilot to help me out with, to help support me on?
Yeah, absolutely. So Copilot is always evolving. So this is really what I think Copilot is good at right now. But I would encourage everyone to stay tuned because it's only going to get better. But if you're adopting Copilot right now, there's a few things that it's really, really good at. It's really good at things like boilerplate code and generating, expressions or things that are relatively routine or repeatable. So some key examples of that. If you are starting a web application, you're potentially trying to build a data model for your new website. I'm trying to create a website for my dog Olive of all her photos categorized. So if you're like me and trying to do that, it's really great for getting the scaffolding set up, for helping me get, my connections to my databases set up so I don't have to go and look at the API and figure out the exact variables if I'm trying to use a new provider, right? All of these things are relatively boilerplate. They're repetitive in a lot of ways. They don't change every time you use them. And Copilot is great at identifying patterns like that. And so I can get started on my website for all of that much faster, even with new technology or new frameworks, because they all kind of follow similar patterns. And that's what machines and particularly generative AI offerings are great at understanding. They are pattern super matchers. So all that boilerplate to get started with a project is something that Copilot is excellent at. Another thing is things that are very like computer readable, but not quite human readable. And what I mean by that are things like cron jobs and regex. We all know if you're working on those items, you have a tab open that is helping you convert those. If you can sight read those, I would love to meet you, but that's certainly not me. And I don't think it's you either, Christopher. Uh,
It is not me. I can I can at least look at it and recognize, okay, that's what I'm looking for. But yeah, being able to write one off the top of my head, yeah, no, that's
Sight
not
read or
happening.
sight write, like that translation, computers great at that. People, not so much. And it's also great for things that have a bit more of a constrained space or suggestions that you could have. And so, like CSS is a great example of this, right? There are particular attributes. Each of those has a certain set of values that it could be. And so writing things like, I need a black border that is this many pixels around some feature on your web page, Copilot's excellent at that. So I've said a lot of things here, but in short, it's great at boilerplate and repetitive code. So like scaffolding work, it's excellent at. It's great at translating things that computers are great at understanding, but humans are not, like regex expressions or cron jobs. And it's awesome for languages that have a relatively constrained domain space, like CSS, where what you write can be like very easily translated to the code you need. And don't get me wrong,
Okay.
it is excellent at the more ambiguous problems. But if you're looking for the biggest bang for your buck right now, those are the areas where it's like really going to shine, in my opinion.
So it could actually center a div with CSS is what you're telling
Correct,
me.
correct. No more issues centering divs. Just have Copilot do it for you and move on with your day.
Perfect. What about the code that I don't necessarily like to write? That I mean, if I'm being honest, and I'm willing to bet if a lot of other developers are being honest, we don't necessarily like creating things like unit tests. That
Oh,
it can be a little
true.
bit tedious. Yeah. So how about that type of code?
Yeah, so you just hit on another one. I mean, thanks for reminding me of that. Unit tests fall into that area where it's slightly more ambiguous, right? Because it's going to depend on the functions that you've written. Um, but they tend to follow a very similar format once you get the first one written, right? And so Copilot will be excellent if you are in your file with the function you're trying to test and you've got maybe the first one or two unit tests, but then it's going to get really good after that at just generating more that you might not have considered. And so you might have to give it, it's one of those areas where because it's a little bit more ambiguous, right? It's not as cut and dry as, say, a regex. You'll need to give it a little bit of context, help it out with a little starter unit test, but then it's going to fly and really help you generate a bunch of the cases and testing pathways. And all you have to do is really look at the suggestion, see if it looks right to you, accept it, and move forward.
Okay. So, speaking of context, he says with a slight smile, because I think I already know the answer. One of the other really common questions that I get asked from business developers is, hey, we've got all of these internal libraries, these internal frameworks that we're using. Is Copilot able to understand that? Is Copilot able to make suggestions on things that maybe it hasn't seen before, or that are maybe a little bit unique to what it is that we're doing in-house?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say if you are in just an empty file and you're trying to get started, Copilot doesn't have a lot to go on. And so it's not going to help you much in that case. And this is actually really important to understand how Copilot generates the suggestions it does. So we look at where your cursor is before and after it in your file, but then we also look at other open files in your editor to see if there's maybe, a method being used in one of those or an interface, just more information about what's going on in this part of the code base. But if you don't have those related files open, Copilot can't use that as part of the prompt. So if you were to ask it to generate, a page that is very similar to another page in your repo. If you have a blank file open and you just say like, Copilot, create me a page for my new cat, uh, Oliver, for example. It's going to do the best it can, but
We're just going to keep with the pet
we're going to keep
examples.
with
I,
the pet
I, I
example.
appreciate that.
Um, it's not it's going to do its best, but more than likely it's going to struggle to give you exactly what you want because you have a different template in mind that already exists, right? But if you open, say, the Olive homepage in this case, Copilot will be able to say, oh, this looks like a page for this website. I bet since they also have this open, I'm going to use that as context in my prompt. And then when I get a suggestion back from the model, it's going to have used that as sort of like input so that it's going to give me better recommendations and it will align to this page that I've already built. And so just by opening other files that are related to the work you're doing, you're actually helping Copilot give you better recommendations. And I want to be like super clear. This isn't the model like learning in real time or anything. The model is exactly the same in both of these cases. It's just the question you asked to the model was better crafted. It's almost the difference in my mind of I would like some ice cream, and Christopher might give me my least favorite ice cream of bubble gum. But if I said, Christopher, I'd really like chocolate chip ice cream, then he knows a little bit more about what to give me to make me happy. And maybe I wanted it with a cone and you gave me a bowl, but the ice cream at least was right.
Okay, I appreciate that analogy. By the way, salted caramel
So
for the
good.
win, if you ask
Salted
me.
caramel is
Yeah,
delicious. Salted caramel
it
with some
is.
cookie dough chunks, phenomenal.
Yep. Um, Okay, we could go off on a tangent talking about ice cream, and I'm trying to keep a little bit on topic here. But so really what it sounds like is I think that analogy is perfect. Is that if I say, hey, just very generically, get me some ice cream, there's a lot more parameters that I might want to also convey there
Exactly.
that just haven't. So I don't necessarily know what I'm getting back. But if I like open up a file, or it also sounds like if I add maybe at like the top of a file a little bit of extra information about, hey, this is what I'm about to do, even just
Exactly.
like 2, 3 lines of, natural language, it's going to help it out.
Absolutely. So whether that is like, a multi-line comment of what you're hoping to accomplish in this file, or even just a singular comment of the very next thing you're trying to do, and making sure that comment is specific, right? Like going back to our real world example, there's a big difference between I want an ice cream and I want a cookie dough ice cream on a waffle cone, right? From insert favorite ice cream place here. And so the more you can
Right.
be specific and the more you can give Copilot, the better it's going to be at what it returns to you. Truly is a mutual
Okay.
relationship there.
I have to help it help me is
Exactly.
basically what I'm
And
what
this
I'm
is why,
hearing
like,
there.
I think, these sorts of conversations are so important. These are such new tools. And as with every new tool, we have to figure out the right way to leverage them and figure out the right way to work them into our existing workflows. And these are just tiny little shifts, right? Commenting your code before you start writing it, something we can all be encouraged to do, helps us here. Having relative files open is a common thing we do, but it's still something we have to know we need to do in order to get the most out of this tool.
Okay. You mentioned comments real quick, and I don't think that GitHub necessarily has like an official stance on this. I'm going to ask you this, like, what's your personal opinion about the comment? So let's say I add in a comment that says, create a method that connects to a database and gets back this piece of information, whatever it is that it happens to be. What's your opinion on leaving those comments behind? Because I talk to some developers who like to leave them. I talk to other developers who like to remove them. It seems to almost fall into like that tab spaces debate. What's your, is there an official stance? I don't think that there
I don't
actually
think
is.
there's, I
And
can't
what's kind of
speak
your
for
opinion?
all of GitHub, but at least for
Okay.
me, as someone who often is inheriting, as a product manager, I inherit a lot of demo code bases as I move through my teams and the different conversations I have. And having those comments is so vital for understanding what's going on. You know, Speaking to the future, I'm very excited for when Copilot can just explain things to me. But if I'm like glancing through a file and trying to understand what these things are doing, especially if I didn't write that project to begin with, it's really important for onboarding.
Let's talk a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the context that's being sent up, the code suggestions that are being sent back down, because I often hear a lot of concern about like what happens with that data. Like, is Copilot keeping that? Is it like retraining its model based on that? Like, what's going on with those suggestions, that context?
Yeah, so the boring answer is nothing is really going on with that data because we don't keep it. We hold on to the context or the prompt merely long enough for us to ask the model that question and then get an answer back. And as soon as we get an answer back, that prompt is completely dropped. And then we take that suggestion, we run it through some safety filters, and also the prompt is run through safety filters as well. But once we have that suggestion, we make sure it's good to get back to you. Then we deliver it to your editor. It shows up in that beautiful ghost text suggestion format, and then it's gone. We forget about it past then. So we do understand things like, did you accept this suggestion? But we really only know, was a suggestion shown and was it accepted? And that helps us, keep eyes on if the model is still performing well. But we don't use or keep any of the actual prompt or suggestion code that was delivered back to you.
Okay. Something just hit me about context, and I want to go back and ask kind
Yeah.
of one more question, because again, I get this an awful lot. Is we have a particular coding style that we use spaces rather than tabs, which is the only way to go, or we have a particular pattern when it comes to naming variables and things like that. Does Copilot follow along with that, or like what is it going to do as it's shaping the suggestions that it's giving me? Is it going to follow what I'm doing?
So it's certainly going to be influenced by the way things are done elsewhere in the code base, right? So again, if you have those files that sort of like mimic what you're going to do in this file, it will take that as input. However, it's not the same as like a true code cleanup or linter here. We still highly encourage people to, run those on their PRs to continue to leverage whatever code configuration or like linting tools that you use now. Copilot will do its best, but we all need to remember at the end of the day that this is a probabilistic machine. And so it's going to be right a lot of the times, but it's not going to be right all of the times. And so things like linters, right, are very methodical, very deterministic, and you should still continue to use those. I look forward to the day where Copilot can tell that you've got this linter going and we run suggestions through that as a filter as well, such that all of our suggestions are formatted in the way that the linter would yell at you about. But we're not there today. I think we're going to get there soon. But right now, don't throw out your linters. Keep using them.
Okay, and then right along those lines, you mentioned about like linters. It also then sounds like I shouldn't stop doing code reviews, that whatever process it is that we already have in place, it sounds like we should still keep doing that even with GitHub Copilot.
Absolutely. The thing that GitHub Copilot is going to be great at is just helping you get to that point of PR and hopefully making it such that when you get to PR, right, things are in a great shape. But it's not going to guarantee that it's going to be in a perfect shape. Again, highly probabilistic machine. They're non-deterministic, right? You can get different suggestions out based on the same context. And so while it's going to help you be more productive, stay in the flow, learn as you go along, you still really have to make sure that you have all the oversight that you have now with code reviews and security scanning. All of those are deeply important tools, and we're not trying to replace those. We're trying to make coding easier and faster and keep developers in the flow. But security tools are there for a reason. Code reviews are there for a reason. Please continue to leverage them. Think of Copilot just as another tool in your tool belt. It's not replacing the whole belt. It's just another little tool that you can use as you go about your day.
Okay. What languages does GitHub Copilot support? What languages, what frameworks?
So technically, it supports everything because
Okay.
pretty much
Everything is a lot.
everything is a lot. It works better for some more than others, is the thing. But the model does have enough such that it can mimic pretty much any language that you put into it. However, suggestions are only as good as what's available in a training set. And so for some less, not lesser languages, sorry, but some less common languages, particularly in the open source, um, your suggestions just aren't going to be quite as good. And you can try all these tricks to provide more context, and that's going to help you. But at the end of the day, the model is strongest at the things it has seen the most of. And so if we think about the training set and we think about open source repositories and projects, things like Python, TypeScript, JavaScript, all of those very, very common languages are going to be where Copilot excels. But technically, Copilot can generate suggestions for pretty much anything it comes across.
Okay. Cool. Last question. I'll get you out of here on this. What would be the core tips that you would give to a developer who gets access to GitHub Copilot for the first time? Like this is their day zero. They're ready to start going. Like what's the big tip that you would give to them?
Oh boy. Well, the big tip is that hopefully they've watched this video because I think our tips about context are really important, right? I think the biggest tip I could give them is install the extension and start using it. Like, truly, this is a tool that by using it, you're going to learn how to get better at it and help it help you better. But you really have to just dig in and get started. So I would say don't get discouraged if your first suggestion isn't exactly right. Just remember what we told you around providing more context and starting small, really. Have it help you with those repetitive tasks and then branch out into the more ambiguous ones.
Perfect. That makes a lot of sense. Allison, thank you so very much for taking the time today. I
Absolutely.
think that was helpful. Hopefully everybody else did. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Always happy to chat about GitHub Copilot and very much looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say and continuing to drive the product forward.